Peugeot.
Yeah, Brian Peugeot, present via teleconference from Holland, Michigan.
Feltman.
Hi, Boyd Feltman, present via teleconference from Holland, Michigan.
Great, and I will try to capture our two other members if I see when they sign on. So with that, thank you, and I'll hand it over to you, Brian.
All right, thanks, Keith. Appreciate it. If you remember from last meeting, we had talked about learning about carbon offsets and the like this meeting, and basically because of the last minute nature of it, that's going to end up getting pushed to the 18th. And Keith and Travis and Dave and I connected over the holiday and about what to learn about today, and as you'll see, we're gonna spend some more time on the electric portfolio. So I wanted just to call that out. If people were wondering what happened to the carbon offsets right out of the gate, that'll be next time. So should be a good agenda today. Maybe it'll be. Yeah, I think it's actually going to be great to revisit the electric portfolio conversation because, the holidays and all, we're all trying to remember, what it's like to work and whatnot anyways. So it'll be good, some good stuff to chew on a little longer. So we'll kick things off with reviewing and approving the meeting minutes from the 14th. Would anyone like to raise a question or make a motion to approve the minutes?
Yes,
Motion to approve the minutes as they're presented. All right, Travis, do I have a second?
Second.
Thanks, Nikki. And any comments or questions before I vote, or am I doing that out of order? Well.
No, that's right, Brian. You should first, second, then ask for any discussion and then vote.
Yeah. So any discussion on the minutes? I'll give anybody another 3 seconds in case you think you're on mute. Or you don't know you're on mute, but you are. Alrighty. All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Thanks, everybody. The minutes have been passed with Travis and Nikki moving and seconding, that's a word. Public comment. We've got some folks here. If anybody's interested in chiming in, we'd love to hear from you in 2021.
And Mr. Chair, if I can, before they jump in on that, this is Dave, just noting that Scott has joined us. So just so you're aware that Scott Corbin is on. I haven't heard from Tim yet. So.
Okay, great. Thanks. Welcome, Scott.
And we have two young stakeholders who are here and would like to make public comment this afternoon.
Cool. Let's hear it.
I feel like we're not really doing anything about global warming yet. The only thing I can think of is stopping traffic for a little bit. My name is Mariam, and I'm really concerned about climate change because eventually there'll be no snow, and Michigan always has snow, and I feel like we could be doing a lot more to help our planet and protect it.
Awesome. Thank you both. Anyone else? Okay. Is that, all right, I don't mean to belabor it. If that is all, that is great. Oh, I see some chat. Oh. Yeah, Keith is asking, is it, oh boy. Oh, there we go. Got it. Okay. If you were reading the chat, then it's recorded. Is it Mika? Micah? Is that?
Sorry, yeah, it's Mika.
Okay, Mika. Sorry, I was gonna call you out and ask the question Keith typed, but then I was gonna butcher your name. Everyone butchers my last name, so.
Welcome to
Trying
the
to get them
club.
to say their names, but they didn't want to, so.
All good. All good. Good for them. Okay, well then if no other comments, then we are going to move on to the receiving of the online public comments. There was a variety of emails sent to council and our group. So we need to officially acknowledge these, and I'm gonna admit holiday hangover. Keith, this is not a vote, or it is a vote?
Yeah, we've been using the process, so we would like you to formally make a motion and support, and then any discussion if there is, and then vote to just receive and file.
Okay.
It just makes it real formal in that we're formally making them part of the agenda packet.
Yep, no, that's great. So is there a motion to formally acknowledge all of the written comments that was submitted online?
So moved by Thompson.
Thanks, PJ. Is there a second?
Second by Williams.
Thanks, Travis. Is there any discussion regarding any of the comments? Is that part of what we're doing? I don't think it is, but I'm freewheeling right now, so let's go with it. Any discussion? Okay. Then all in favor of acknowledging the public comments? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
None opposed. All right. We moving right along here. Sorry if I'm sounding hesitant. I'm having a heck of a time with my screen a little bit here, so you'll have to forgive me. Has nothing to do with what you guys are doing. It's me. All righty. Moving right along, folks. The draft report and recommendation to City Council. We'll just take a quick look at this and acknowledge any new information. If anyone wants to chat about what's been added.
If Keith wants to make any comments here, I think generally just letting you know that staff has not made any real changes as it relates to the background and history. That is as it was drafted at this point, and I think there's opportunities for refinement as we move along. The next section that really is I would say in play at this point is the area that's dealing with the community, discussion about the community. And, I'll let Keith talk a little bit about, a meeting that we had this last week, which I thought was really good. And it's something that we're kind of teeing you up for the 18th of this month as well, in terms of some additional information. So Keith, I'll let you maybe just touch on that.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. We're excited. I will admit that one of the members knows probably this conversation happened because Dave and I had a really productive conversation with Joe Sikma. And Joe is actually an ODC employee, so Travis knows him well. And Joe, as part of the city contract, has is working with Joe and ODC on various education pieces for sustainability work. But in particular, we knew that Joe has some great experience with sustainability work. Travis, I think I have this right, that he worked for Hayworth.
Correct.
And we've asked him in particular to dig into some of the really great questions and challenges, I think appropriately, that the SDT has put forward to talk about benchmarking, to talk about kind of the best practices of other communities. As far as, you know, do they resemble us in makeup, whether that be kind of our industrial sector or not. But also to be, you know, really creative in how to gather a lot of information and how to report that back to this committee, and definitely have a section in the draft report that talks about that in depth. So Joe is really taking point on that for us. We know he's already been working on it. He went through some kind of structural things of how he was trying to organize that report. And I can let you know that he's gotten off to a great start. We've tried, Dave and I have done our best to communicate some of the things that you've all raised. And I'm pretty sure that Joe has been watching the tapes of these meetings too. So like Dave said, I think he's off to a great start on that. And then in this draft report, you'll see that's where his work will start showing up. And we haven't talked about this yet with Brian and Travis, but we hope and we think that maybe at our meeting on the 18th, we will have a little bit of time for him also to introduce himself and give kind of an early presentation on the work that he's doing, so that if we can do some early input and course correction if needed, that you all can have that direction and give that to Joe.
This is a very important page, I think. As I was reviewing it for this meeting, it has what are the compelling energy issues, what is our overall goal, what is our service area, and I'm hoping all those get included in our discussion now.
Yeah, so I mean, I think what the work that Joe's doing is going to be data driven to get you the information that you need to see what are truly the comparable communities that are out there, and then, you know, what is it that they're doing in terms of initiatives. So from a best practices standpoint, I think you're going to have a good sense then of, you know, goal setting, you know, based upon data. And if you go back up again a little bit, Becky, if you wouldn't mind, to the diagram a little bit further up, the options for diagrams right there. You know, this is how Joe is putting it together, you know, and pick whichever graphic you want, but looking at, I would say, sizing up the community based upon the people and the profit side of things. So looking at, you know, some of our population data, looking at, you know, some of our makeup of, you know, our community in terms of the residential versus, you know, the business sector, things like that. You know, a lot of different qualifiers to say, how well does Holland line up with community, you know, XYZ. And then similarly in the profit side, when you start looking at the intensity of our manufacturing base and things like that, you know, are there other communities that are comparable in that regard? This will be really good information, looking at communities that line up well, some that maybe don't line up well, but then within that data set, you know, what is it showing in terms of the type of initiatives that they're doing? What kind of successes have they had? And I think that last piece is going to take a little bit of additional work to run down all of that detail on all the initiatives. But Joe is going to be well along by the 18th, I think, in terms of being able to give you a set of, here's some communities on a regional, national, and even international level that that match up fairly well on the people and profit side of things. So then the planet side, in terms of, you know, how the energy piece of the whole picture comes together, this group will have a set of communities, again, regional, national, international, to look at in terms of best practices and benchmarking based upon those that are similarly situated within the first two categories.
So we don't have to reinvent the wheel, and yet we can take that and create our own vision for our what we want to see in terms of energy and everything going forward.
Yeah, should be instructive in a lot of ways. And I think, just as you said, Nikki, it's things that we can use here. And then there are also things where you go, well, that's what's out there, but, you know, we think for whatever reasons, you know, these are our goals and what we want to, you know, put forward as identified, you know, metrics and targets. You know, that's, again, the purview of the SDT, but it is, I think, going to be an informed decision then based upon the information. And like I said, Keith and I were very impressed with the work that Joe had done to date. And I think with a few more weeks underneath his, you know, underneath him here, he'll be able to, you know, really bring you a good set of information to start from, hopefully on the 18th, if we can make time on the agenda for that.
I will let you know too, just as a little bit of a foreshadow, for those of you that are connected in the business community with Lakeshore Advantage, one of the things that they've really done is they've picked, I think it's 4 communities that in particular we as a region are benchmarking with. And Joe has made each of those 4 on the list that he's taking a look at them again from that people, profit, planet kind of balancing all of those things in those priorities. So that's where he's gathering that information. So again, have been impressed with Joe, and we'll give you, if it works at the next agenda, we'll give you some information to react to on the 18th.
Sounds great. Any other comments or questions from folks on the on our framework document and what the staff is working on?
Yeah, for Keith, mostly from the last discussion, I thought we hit on something really important, which was, you know, ongoing leadership, ownership from a staffing perspective to oversee the holistic plan here. Somebody who's tagged with, you know, measuring, following up, you know, more the tactical, organizational, overall. I don't want to undermine it by calling it a project manager. It's bigger than that. But any more thought about that and its place in this document as well as an emerging, you know, management of this?
So the way I'd answer that, Boyd, is this. I think we're still thinking about what this would look like is probably the fairest. But Dave and I did have, that was part of our lengthy conversation with Joe also. Because there's elements of all of this that I think you really kind of, I don't know exactly how you described it last time or a couple times ago, Boyd, but you were kind of like there was this, you know, light bulb aha moment type thing for you, right? Okay, good. You're smiling. So you're now. So I think there's an element where it's like a new column that says like, okay, who's kind of like the owner of this action? And whether that's kind of an additional kind of on a horizontal axis that we can add that. We've also had some discussions of it almost becomes like a 3-dimensional component potentially of the opportunity matrix. So we're trying to figure that out a little bit. I know, for example, one of the things that Dave and I are looking at and have asked Joe to look at is to take a look at what I'd call kind of that first level as a city organization and as a BPW organization, what do we have the highest level of ownership over? So for example, it would be city buildings and city vehicles, and are we using the renewable energy rate in electricity and those types of things. And we're really doing some work there to say, okay, like we can be more aggressive because we own that, and let's define who's the owner of that. And then in some other areas, we're going to need partners because we don't own that in the same way. So that's very much part of that conversation, Boyd. I'm going to tell you, I'm not sure if we're going to have much more to present to you on the 18th or not.
No, it's bigger than that, right? It's a placeholder spot that, as we evaluate this whole approach, I think that is possibly one of the bigger things. Where I'm coming from is, I think like a conglomerate world that I used to live in, and we would have the New York Fed pop up with banking regulations that would apply, that we needed to apply globally because we were a US headquartered company. So then we had local, we had state, we had federal, and then international. So it got complicated in that the businesses would own it in pockets, right? But there was nobody, if there was nobody there to tie it all together, funnel it up, package, push back down, it was a catastrophe. And what I see is with emerging legislation at the possibly federal, state, local ambitions, it's getting to the point where I don't see how you can expect utility management and city management to do it without somebody who's used to thinking up, down, back around, and holding it and owning it as a bigger concept. It just crosses over each department within. I don't know that it's just a city manager thing is what I'm getting at. I mean, it's so big.
Yeah. So even to the sense of, do we have something on the 18th? Or Boyd, quite frankly, I don't even know if it's something that's part of the recommendation, like when SDT says something to council, like, hey, this is exactly what you need to do. Or if, quite frankly, that becomes one of the tactics, the strategies that we need, that we take the next 3 to 5 years to figure out and build.
Right. That's right. And that's about right. It took me 5 years in GE to react to the crisis and build out what we needed to do globally by working with all the individual businesses and departments and gathering data and information and groups and,
So even just having this short conversation is helpful, because I think that's probably, if you really pinned me to the wall and said, like what's possible between now and then, I would probably say more, well, that's possibly a recommendation that SDT says, make that a specific task force over the next 3 to 5 years to dig into more and figure out. And then in the meantime, we'll get hopefully more clarity from the federal and the state level as to what they're doing. Mm-hmm. But let's put a pin in that, Boyd. I understand what you're saying, Dave and I.
What about for the benchmarking, though? I feel like that is a critical part of benchmarking, to see not only what they're doing, but how are they managing it? What are they learning? What's evolving? What do they do for staffing and oversight?
That was going to be my point. I think that when we get the data back on these communities, part of it is data. Hopefully part of it is being able to have conversations with those communities that are most aligned in terms of how they actually shape up compared to Holland, that we actually ask those type of questions in terms of that. Becky, the thing I would remind everybody too, if you can scroll back up a little bit on this, pretty much to the close to the start, there's a structure to the organization of the CEP. Just as a reminder right there, that we have a structure to it, and to a certain extent, as it gets down to the level of executing strategies, it's managed within the steering committee approach. And there's constant work going on. I think one of the things that we're finding this time around, and I think part of the dialogue that you've shared as well, Boyd, is that there's a pretty steep learning curve here for this SDT group. So when we go back and revisit the next time around for this, or how this group continues to remain engaged, is it less turnover than what we have between the last time and this time because of the institutional knowledge that you're gaining through this background development? That might be a tweak that we want to do on this, but there may be other groups, other communities that have a much different management structure than what this graphic would identify. And maybe there's some things that we could learn, from that benchmark. And as you indicate, that I think is going to be informative.
And Boyd, I think we still need to do the work. Dave's exactly right. It's kind of in the structure. It's kind of a direction that we're going, which I think we're hearing clearly from you, right? I'm just going to say it's early, right? But some of the communities that we've looked at, for example, maybe are heavier on having a goal, but really have no structure, have no resources, have no tactics, have no strategy, have no plan on how to achieve the goal. Yikes. Right? And others maybe have more there. But we know that there's some that just have a goal and really nothing beneath it. So that's the work that we're doing, and that's part of Joe's research and evaluation, and in time, that's part of his report back to all of you. So it's data driven, so that we're, our role, Dave and I's role, right, is to give you information upon which you can, discern and have discussions and ultimately make recommendations. So that's what we're committed to, and we're going to keep doing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good. It's really good, Boyd. Keith and Dave have heard me bring this up a few times on the side. Just this thing is such a monster. It's part of our recommendations if we're going to do the whole plan justice is to, have some ideas for improving on just the function of either the SDT or the ongoing nature of the whole thing. It's just a huge thing. I mean, it touches, energy and sustainability touch everything. So it's like, it's a monster. So
it's its own department. I mean, when you really look at it,
yeah,
it needs legal, it needs good financial analytics, it needs project management at so many different levels. And then the only good thing is you don't need necessarily headcount to execute, because you'd reach out into pockets of the community. Actually, it needs advertising. We talk about community education and PR.
Yeah.
It's its own department.
And I think a lot is there. I think we're all just getting it's all of our first times doing this SDT thing. We're all, getting our arms around what it is more and realizing how big and comprehensive it is. And I actually think that there's a lot, to Dave and Keith's point, and to Dave and the previous people that have worked on its credit, there's a lot happening and here already, right? It's more of, I think about like city council is going to read some report after all the months and meetings that we've been doing, and they're supposed to get it like that. Like, are we writing them that's a big report. Thankfully, 2 council people are on the committee, but considering all the things that this touches, maybe city council should be sitting on this every 2 weeks, like that would fast forward the process. But no, it's really, I agree that that'll be part of how I think some of what we recommend is.
Well, and what I see as I read this over again, and with a new administration, national administration coming in, and just readings in other areas, whether periodicals or other professional readings, we know that everything's in Europe. Things are moving toward renewable resources. And I feel BPW, Dave, I mean, you are on this, you know this, and you know, the progress from 2010 to now has been incredible. And I think going forward, it's a matter of what does it look like? More of the same, ramp it up a little bit. We know it's coming, and it's a matter of what we, you know, economically and our vision of what is to happen. We really kind of know ultimately where it's going to happen, what's going to happen in the future. And it's just, how are we positioning ourselves for this? What are we going to do about it now?
And just to, you know, address that again, you know, and I know we're kind of trickling into the education subject here a little bit, but the integrated resource plan last time, you know, when you look at any one of those scenarios, you know, especially the ones that have the carbon constrained situation, almost 100% of anything new that's added is a renewable resource to our portfolio over that time frame. So I think, you know, we're not any different in terms of, you know, the future resources for the utility. You know, but I think the important thing to point out is that the electric portfolio, you know, doesn't get it all done, because there's thermal needs, there's process needs, there's transportation needs, and we don't control, you know, the decision making about whether somebody puts in a gas boiler or a gas furnace in their house, or whether they choose to drive an EV versus a gasoline powered vehicle, or, you know, how much they choose to insulate their home. You know, those are all right now incentivized to a certain degree, but they're not mandated. And so, you know, back to the level of control and ownership, I think that Boyd was talking about, you know, the electric portfolio is one piece of a puzzle that, if the true desire is significant reduction below 10 and even to 0, you know, there's the other areas, you know, need to also be addressed.
Yeah. Yep.
That, when I read that plan, Dave, and I said I had a big aha moment for me, it was looking at that page that gave those scenarios going, well, then, you know, we aren't structured right now in this community to go further and bigger. Truly, if it's true action, we're not structured. And that is the number one thing. The technologies underlying and feasibility, yes, we need to go through that, but structure is a big deal. I think that's the biggest problem facing this group strategically.
And BPW has in one of those documents the education and the marketing, and that's where, you know, we've got it from the top down in the plan, and the organization is amazing, and now it needs to come from the people and from those other areas that we don't have control over, but we can incentivize or give a vision for or get excited.
Yeah, I think, you know, one of the actions that are underway right now is this education piece. And I don't know if maybe that's a good topic for this group to hear what the latest is even on that. But, you know, we know that Outdoor Discovery Center is connected with us now. But even beyond that, you know, the idea of actually identifying the outline of an educational plan is something that, you know, Mark Vanderplug is heading as far as one of the tactical action teams this time. And I think, you know, to your point, Nikki, you know, we really see, for this to grow from a customer behavior standpoint or a resident behavior standpoint, you know, we've got to find ways into different groups where there are others that they trust and want to listen to, even beyond, you know, their utility provider or government. You know, not a lot of people respond well to government's here to help you. So, you know, we have to figure out ways of, you know, getting those trusted entities as part of the mission of growing that awareness and campaign. so.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're on it. So yeah, hopefully
We're on it.
that's a huge conversation, right? And Boyd, yes, Dave, that's been a tension for Dave and I think for a long time, probably Dave for longer than I, because accepting a goal for something that you don't have control over in a direct way is a difficult thing. So we're very interested in a healthy and robust conversation and debate about that.
It'd be really interesting, every city or municipalities having these debates. And I wonder if some have been very aggressive in the structure of their local city government to get a grasp on it and really, work. It's a cross-functional challenge, right? And you can tap a lot of resources in other departments, whether it's building codes that you're going after, or whether it's, in our case, a utility, but it's so tapping the finance department so they can help out on some analytics. It's a big cross-functional job. Right up, diversity leadership. We took a step there. Yeah,
so lots of conversations there, and I don't want to be the rain on the parade guy too, but we've additionally have the complexity of there's just some things that we structurally and probably driven by resources are not allowed to use city resources on. So just because we all come up with an idea and say, boy, we really should have a city or a BPW person working in this particular area, there, and I don't know what that could be, what that idea could be, but there are some ideas that it would be, boy, wouldn't that be great if we could? And the legal answer would be, sorry, we can't use city resources or the city structure or the BPW structure to do that, right? So it even gets more complicated from that perspective, right?
Yeah. I think some of the constraints are, they can be overcome. I think that the emphasis on education and getting the word out, combined with just general, to Nikki's point earlier, just general market dynamics on this stuff is only heading in one direction anyways. Like, I don't think in 15 years, people are going to given up on electric vehicles, for instance, it's directionally heading somewhere. So we've got some market tailwinds. So this is really about just understanding, like, how can we lead? How can we tell the story? How can we get better at influencing people and nudging people so that they move a little quicker? So the constraints that the city and BPW feel, I think, can be overcome when people that are, the businesses and residents, when they get it, when they're well educated and understand what the opportunity is, they'll want to act. I think, but it takes a concerted effort to lead and tell the story in a meaningful way. And a big job, to Boyd's point. It's a a meet every 2 weeks for 2 hours and, check out a mobility proposal for the city. And also, 40-year contracts for coal powered plants, like no big deal. Like just, make a recommendation. It's sort of comprehensive, so anyways, it's good. Any other comments on the report? Sounds like we've got some more data coming from like-minded or similar communities next time from Joe, which is great. Any other things that people want to talk about here in this part of the agenda?
Brian, I had a question, again, from the report that this draft is very helpful. And my question might be to maybe Nikki or Mayor Box, because it pertains to the resolution R 2012.61. And again, I haven't read that resolution in its entirety, but is the spirit of that resolution that our group would come up with ideas that would be very aggressive or when I look at the words that refer to it, it says that our group would evaluate things incrementally. And I guess where my question comes is incrementally seems to be almost not congruent with some of the feedback we're getting, particularly from the city or from citizens. Is there any guidance we can look to from that resolution to shape how aggressive we want to be with this strategy?
Other people could probably answer that a little better, but PJ, I think the disconnect is actually more in how the report about some of the language talking about the CEP being world-class, and then a lot of this climate science data has been massively updated in the last few years. And so I think the disconnect is that what we had and thought we had was world-class, and now all of a sudden the goal doesn't look world-class, even though our plan, I think we'll find out relative to what other cities have in place, it may very well still be world-class, but I think that that's the disconnect. And when this was all written, obviously none of that new climate science was published or real. And so this incremental, strategic, over a 40-year plan, we're going to look at the strategic initiatives in 3 to 5 year increments. And so it sort of leads you to believe we're looking at things in smaller chunks, but oh, by the way, this whole thing is sort of under the banner of world-class, and the goal we set isn't really world-class anymore. So I think that's the disconnect there, and maybe Dave and Keith can expound, but that's I think why we're trying to do two things this time around. We're trying to do the 3 to 5 year outlook, and we're confronted with this larger conversation around the big goal because of that new information.
Yeah, so I've got a little bit of history here. I was looking to see if either the resources document or my own directory had the resolution in it, because I would be able to pull it up. And it doesn't, but I can get it, make sure it's in the resources document so you can see the entirety of the resolution. And I think that could be instructive. There's a lot of new faces on council today than were there in 2012, obviously, when that resolution was adopted, but I was there when it was, in terms of a staff person as well. And that was, I think those words were purposeful in that it just recognized the fact that the plan was a strategy document, is also has been kind of pointed out in both in the background and in the document itself of terms of the CEP, that it deserved business case evaluation on those strategies. So it was also a document that, as Brian points out, is a bold document in its strategy and looking for things that are more transformational. I would say transformational and incremental tend to be a little bit more at opposition with each other. So, I don't want to suppose what the mindset is of council today, but I do know those words were purposefully chosen because of the fact that it was unknown exactly what these transformational strategies were going to cost or what they were going to mean in terms of the effectiveness and business case associated with them. And that's why the CEP steering committee, along with the tactical action groups, needed to explore that. So, that was the mindset at the time that the resolution was adopted, was to be very careful, but progressive and comprehensive in terms of our exploration. But I think you pick up on an important word there, because incremental and transformational can sometimes run at opposition to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'll make sure that we get that information. I think there was an initial charge also to this group, maybe more specifically from the mayor. Just like Dave kind of said, and I don't want to speak on behalf of council here, because my guess is there's probably 9 different versions of feelings on incremental versus transformational, or even I would substitute incremental with achievable. So I think that's part of the tension, quite frankly, that's been assigned to the SDT, is to do the detailed amount of work that Brian's just talked to pretty well, that said, man, we're doing 2 hours every other week plus homework in addition to that to dig into this. Structurally, I always think of, that's why we have citizen committees like this that come together periodically, because the reality is they can do a level of detailed work that just isn't in the realm of council to do across all things. I even mentioned this, I almost said this earlier, like, I'm sure Dave and I both appreciate the level of confidence you all have in our leadership. But so, there's days where I feel like Monday I'm solving for affordable housing, Tuesday I'm solving for climate change, Wednesday I'm solving for diversity, equity, and inclusion, Thursdays I'm solving for broadband for all. Like there's some really big items on our collective plates, and by extension, council has that same thing. So that's where work like you all are doing to have an amount of, like, hey, you're supposed to dig into it and kind of understand the tensions and the complexities, and then come back and make a recommendation. That's the work that you've been given, PJ. As hard as that is, I do believe I can speak on behalf of council where that's what they're looking for you to do.
And sometimes I think with resolutions or other documents like that, it helps other communities. And I think that's what we're going to learn from Joe, what everyone is doing and where they are. So we're all learning, and you get kind of a collective momentum when something is important, and it helps us all learn, whether we want to take those under consideration or not.
Yep.
Well, and like I mentioned earlier, the difference between, okay, if they've adopted a goal and if they have the strategy and substance underneath it to achieve that goal or not.
But we're all learning what they're doing.
Yeah. So that's we're going to be gathering that information and bringing it back to you. I think the challenge is going to be, I'm just going to let you know right now, there's not going to be like a really simple, like, silver bullet to just go, oh, well, wow, there it is, right? This is tough work, but it's worthy work. So we're going to stay committed.
Yeah. Does that help, PJ? Does that get at what you're asking about?
Yes, just listening to that discussion back and forth, I think, is very helpful. It prompts another thought and another question. And that is, when you think of the end deliverable to city council is a set of recommendations. I'm reading, and I'm just taking this from the draft that we are now compiling. It's saying that these recommendations should be within the context of an agreed strategic basis. So when I read that and think about it, I'm not so sure that this is a calling for us to come up with the most aggressive, radical, reductive types of measures, but rather maybe a comprehensive evaluation of a lot of such measures, and maybe what would be viewed more moderate measures, in order to prescribe what would be an agreed strategic basis, which could likely be a mix of them. And I think that we need to prepare our city council for a plethora of reactions, some being quite negative, possibly saying, no, the goal has to be zero. We all know this. We're reading about this, but that may not, all actions to go in that direction might not be an agreed strategic basis that our council needs in terms of strategy going into the next decade. I would go on to say that, you think of the other unique part of our task here is, you look at how Holland was built. So much of our initiatives were generative initiatives that were evaluated on the basis of what gains would be made. Whereas I don't think we can deny that the calling for this is taking on things that won't necessarily have gains in the end, but we will have prevented things in the end. And that requires a whole different really way of analyzing. It's hard to do an ROI on something geared towards preventing something from happening. But I think that's part of our challenge. And I think in the end, when we come up with a deliverable, and again, I'm not trying to go too deep into the future, but I could foresee a strategy that is both generative and preventive. And we'll probably have to do a couple of different types of analysis to justify, those balances of suggestions. It's hard to, I'm trying to put this together, so it's hard to articulate it. But what I somewhat fear as a member of our team is a crash at the end where, we come up with something and it's thought of as not sufficient or has missed the mark. And I don't think that's what any of us want. And I think part of the hard work is really analyzing and coming up with frameworks so that we can make suggestions that are A, useful to the council, the city council, but B, help keep our community working together, which we need to do if we're going to achieve anything in this regard.
Yeah, I think you're thinking about it the right way, PJ. I think, when we just set all the big goals aside and we just think about what's currently happening and focus on the next 3 to 5 years, what we would recommend, I think we're going to have some pretty strong opinions and feel pretty good about some of those recommendations. And considering the building stock, commercial, institutional, industrial building stock makes up 80% of our pie right now, or whatever that number is, 73%, there's a high likelihood there's going to be a lot of focus there. And I personally know from my work that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in those areas. And so I think that will feel good and concrete. And then when it gets into the goal stuff, the big goal, I agree with you. I think that I don't know that it will be helpful. Well, I just think there's a scenario where we end up providing a spectrum of possibility where it says, if you want to do 0, these are the things that we've learned and that you'd be getting yourself into. And if you want to do 5 by 2040, and I think there's a spectrum of possibilities that we'll be able to lay out. And then I think some of our recommendations might be, create task forces to figure out how much detail, which one you want to pick. Not to predict the future too much, but I do think we have a both and here, and I do want to give something to council that's useful. And I think that's why next time when we meet on the 18th and we're going to get the crash course in carbon offsets, I think that'll be a good conversation for all of us to enter into together so that we can start to see how some of these other businesses and cities even can talk about something related to 0. Like, what are the underlying assumptions that they're making that even empower them to say, we have a goal of net 0. And I think there's going to be some, I think in 2 weeks, some really fruitful learning and conversation that will empower, I think, some of what feels a little squishy to us right now. But yeah, I think that you're right though. There's an interesting element to this relative to the ambiguity of the goals and the length of the plan, so to speak.
DJ, I think the other point you hit on, I think keeping the stake in the ground from when Holland first analyzed, so that avoidance, greenhouse gas avoidance, can always be shown and presented is a big deal. And so we have that stake in the ground, and I think that chart would be allowed, so we can show that trajectory. So
yeah.
The other thing I would share, PJ, as I listen to you share what you just did, is I think ultimately, and I've said this to Keith and Dave and Brian, ultimately what we're talking about is changing the system. And in order to change the system, we have to engage all the members of that system in the change. And so our ultimate end game here is probably more recommendation style on our part, and then it's going to really lead to us having to, and us being the city, whoever, creating other vehicles or mechanisms to engage the system more fully, because you're not gonna change everything by just sitting here or mandating a number that represents only what the city of Holland is engaged with, and completely ignores, potentially the person living across the street because they're not in the city of Holland or whatever that might be. So we have a much larger thing to tackle here as a community, and that's when you start defining, the service area and what we're talking about. But again, it goes back to me, this is a systems changing effort, and therefore it's going to require getting all the system in the room at some point in time. And that's something we have to keep in mind as we keep working forward on this.
Yep. Structure.
It's good. Other comments or questions from the report? Otherwise, we'll move into, I think the next item is the resources document. Just touching base on that. Is there any new noteworthy highlights to share with us?
Yeah.
The only thing I would add there, and then I'll give it to Dave. I think there were a few things maybe that Cinca added, that Dave added. Kind of every time that we do a presentation, like from one meeting, then we'll add that presentation in the resources document of the next. One thing that I know that we've talked about, and I wouldn't want to do the work unless you all thought it was a good idea, is as Becky scrolls down here, there's like historical background and there's like the work that you're doing. But when you start taking a look at like the Ford mobility proposal or what the integrated resource plan means and all those types of things, right now or various education pieces. Right now, we've just kind of had those in there. And we've had some discussion of if it makes sense to group those in this document in the same way that we're starting to group those in the opportunity matrix, and kind of use that terminology that we have different levers that we can pull on. And if we present that information in the resources document using the same terminology and the same presentation, if that's helpful not only to you, but ultimately to the end user when we have a final report. And if you think that's helpful, then we'll probably work on making that change. If you don't think it's helpful, then we're not going to spend time on doing it. So just looking for feedback from all of you, if I described that well or not, and if you think that would be helpful.
I don't know what you mean.
So in the opportunity matrix, when Dave talks about the levers that we can use, for example,
right, I got it here.
Portfolio,
Right.
Building energy consumption.
Building energy consumption.
Transportation.
We're going to talk about carbon offsets. We're going to talk about transportation. Right now, we don't necessarily have the resources document grouped together in those categories.
So all these, okay, I see what you mean. Okay.
So what we've talked about is that perhaps in the end, would that be helpful to the end user to group all of those things in the same categories that we've started to talk about, that's in the opportunity matrix, that potentially will flow into the eventual report, and maybe even recommendations that you would all make? But again, we don't want to like change that in the middle and then you guys don't know, like, hey, what did you do? Or even for us to spend time on doing that unless you thought that would be helpful at some point.
It's hard to say.
I personally like it as a master document that perhaps could have a note though that points you to what section you would go to for more detailed information. Personally, it's nice having it in one place like that, especially after you guys float it into the categories already on that. But maybe it's just missing a pointer to where you can go get more.
Yeah, just maybe a fine point on it. If you look just above this page 2 here, Becky, if you go up just a little bit, Ford Mobility Proposal has its own thing. Mm-hmm. You know, so we would name it, instead of document for that section, we might have transportation as a big headline.
Exactly.
And it would have Ford Mobility Proposal as that particular one. And then it might have other things that are transportation related in that group. You know, HPPW documents has things related to the energy waste reduction program, but that's kind of in the building consumption area, not in the electric portfolio area. So if you look at, you know, again, the levers that can be pulled, you can incentivize efficiency improvements in buildings, you can green your electric portfolio. There are other things in there that are related to the electric portfolio. And so, you know, as we talk about and start educating by lever, because we started that this last time, you know, Keith and I are just wondering, you know, again, whether or not grouping the resources is helpful to you, but also in the end would be helpful that anybody that's going and looking at the reference document here, the resource document, would say, okay, they're talking about all these opportunities and new strategies by the lever area. So, you know, what are the supporting documents that are also associated with those levers?
I take it back. If that's what you're saying, yeah, I misunderstood. Having them in harmony and harmonized is always a good thing.
Yeah.
I think it makes sense. I don't think it needs to be done in the next 2 weeks. I think it can just be, you know, it slowly morphs into something that matches the framework document. I think you're going to run into the situation where some of the documents could be applicable to multiple areas. So that makes me think, would it be better to like put like a numeric system next to the names, and then in our framework, like in our report, it references like 1.1, and then you can go to this and there's 1.1, and that way 1.1 can show up 16 different times if that's applicable. Again, you could probably do both, but I mean, some of this stuff, you know, energy waste surveys, are we talking about industrial buildings, you know, residential buildings? You know, there's going to be some stuff that's going to have applicability in multiple buckets that we may just want to create a different format access to through numbers or letters or something. Does that make sense?
Sure, that's fair.
Yeah, it does. And we were thinking along the same line, Brian, of like you're reading the report and you can just do a hyperlink, right? And then come back and those types of things. So, but we didn't want to make that change. And then all of a sudden you go like, holy cow, you blew up our resources document, right?
No,
but what I hear is go ahead and probably move in that direction, but it doesn't have to be done by next time. And then when we do it, you won't be surprised either.
And I have a different but related question. So if you'll do that, that's great. The last one, the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. To get into it, you need a password. And I think there's one other like that in here, but the last one for sure.
Okay, they must have added that somewhere along the line, or so.
Yeah, it's a secret document.
Okay, if any time that you come across that, just so My memory isn't always so great. If you just send me a note of anything that seems broken or anything, just offline via email, that'd be really helpful.
Okay. I was glad not to have to read it at the moment, but
Cool.
alrighty, thank you.
Keith, yeah, I like the direction it's going, but don't wipe out this document. Have that as a backdrop. It's something that we can refer to, but I absolutely agree that we need to be able to have that cross-reference. So if we're in a particular sector, oh, gee, here are the following numbers or letters, etc., that are related to that particular sector, because I think that will help people understand scope and depth. So I think that's going in the right direction. It's going to make it simpler.
Yep.
Thanks. Then the only other thing I would add, just as a preface to tonight's education, is if you scroll up a little bit, Becky, I think under BPW document, there you go. You can see that January 4. So I'm going to be spending a little bit of time tonight talking about our distributed generation policy. This is the customer-owned generation, like solar panel on roofs and possibly wind. There's a few situations like that, but not as many as solar. Primarily it's solar, but looking at our policies and how we have implemented that here at the BPW as part of the education. It fits into a little bit of the discussion of the opportunity matrix as well, but that's the whole report from our tactical action team here at the BPW that spent time on that and presented policy updates to our board back in 2019 for update of July 1, 2019. So if you want to reference any more detailed information, more than the PowerPoint that I'm going to be spending time on this afternoon, that's the document.
Okay.
So that's everything under resource, Brian.
Great. All right. Well, and Dave would be able to articulate the logic behind circling back on the electric portfolio probably more concisely than I can, but this made sense as we talked about it over the holiday. If you go back in time, we're starting to get it in this rhythm of doing an educational deep dive in each one of these meetings. And we started to lay out, like, every 2 weeks, we'll learn about something different based off of the survey. And the moral of the story is, I think, and we got afforded it by the carbon expert having to delay, is it may make sense to spend 2 weeks, 2 meetings, that is, at a time, like we did last time, went through the IRP, and then this time circle back and dig deeper and get clarifying questions and actually have time to sit on this stuff and possibly make decisions or get closer to prioritizing information and things we want to circle back on in the future, versus just every single time going from one thing to the next. And so I think that's what we'll try and do moving forward is spend 2 meetings digging in to topics at a time as applicable. So with that, Dave, if you want to expound on that. Otherwise,
yeah, thanks, Brian. And so for this particular topic of the electric portfolio, two things tonight, or actually 3 things tonight. One is checking in. We dealt with the IRP last time, which are really things that instruct how the BPW can meet the customer needs going forward underneath certain constraints. And the constraints that we put on are, a carbon constraint, at the least cost, essentially. So you've got your environmental target, and you're trying to meet it at the least cost. What are the different ways that you could do that? And we've got, various scenarios that were all identified in that IRP. So that is instructive to potential new strategies going forward. The other piece of that, and the second piece is the distributed generation, which is more the customer-owned side of the generation themselves owning equipment. And that's something I'm going to touch on a little bit more detail tonight. And then the third is really kind of now that we've got this ability to sort of, as Brian said, sort of have it saturate here and everybody to kind of spend a little bit of time with it, is to go back to the opportunity matrix and say, okay, now here's what we're doing right now, what's currently underway. Here's what we see is really kind of available to us in the short term, 3 to 5 year. Here's some longer term, so that you can, as a group, maybe start to zero in, as Brian said, maybe start to zero in on, yeah, these are good strategies, or no, I'd like to see something a little bit different. Maybe can we pull something forward? Can we, push and pull on those a little bit? Take it by the lever, and electric portfolio kind of being that first one, so that maybe we get to starting to define a set of recommended strategies. And obviously, when we get to the end and we start getting the benchmarking from these communities, there may be new things that come in and say, hey, look what that community is doing. Maybe we should take a look at that being a strategy as well. But at least we could start making progress towards getting a list of strategies together at that point. So the first thing I want to do is just check in. I threw a lot at you last time as it relates to the IRP. Is there anything additional that, questions that came up, clarifications on the IRP before I would dive into the distributed generation discussion?
Quiet crowd.
Well, and again, these things can be answered as we move along, and maybe as we get to the opportunity matrix, it'll prompt additional things from that as well. So if there aren't any on the IRP, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into a PowerPoint, and just bear with me a second as I pull up a sharing screen. So what this is going to do, hopefully everybody can see the presentation here.
Yep.
Okay, good. So this is the culmination of the work that was done by a tactical action team looking at our policies that are currently at the BPW, or we're currently at the BPW, and how do we interface with customers that would desire to own and operate their own generation. And are policies well defined? Are they the appropriate rate methodologies for that? And so that team looked at that and made a series of recommendations back to the board, some of which have been implemented, some that are a little bit longer terms recommendations that actually could become part of the opportunity matrix you'll see kind of going forward. So if I dive into it here, we're going to spend a little bit of time just discussing what distributed generation is, and then review the different policies. And there's really kind of two main areas. There's federal law that actually dictates that certain owners of types of generation are allowed by law to own and operate them. And they are under what's called the PURPA laws, or the Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act. They're generally for larger equipment. So if somebody had a 10 megawatt solar array that they wanted to build in Holland, the law would cover how we are obligated to interconnect to them, and what they're entitled to in terms of how the BPW would pay for power that they would inject into our system. Those are covered by federal law. We'll touch on that briefly, but we don't have a lot of those cases. Most of our cases fall under the second portion here, which is our distributed generation program. And we'll talk a little bit about how that works and how customers are credited for power that they produce. So again, distributed generation, what is it? It's customer owned and or operated generation that uses renewable resources. So solar, wind, hydro, or a qualified waste product could become underneath the definition eligible for as distributed generation. It could also constitute combined heat and power. So if there was an industry out there that wanted to use a fossil fuel, but then they were using a certain quantity of waste heat for their own processes, it has to be a certain amount. It can't be just a de minimis amount. It has to be a substantial amount of waste heat. It can also qualify, under distributed generation programs. Those would tend to fall under the larger category and would tend to be most under that federal rule for PURPA generally. They're really not going to be small enough. You're not going to see many of those that are going to be small enough to fit under our program. The one exception I would say is our wastewater plant is actually going to be small enough to fall under that with its biodigester and combined heat and power. Mm-hmm. Generally, these are on site. They sit at a customer's facility and they serve the loads that are those customers, those demands that the customers are using for electricity or needing for electricity. Sometimes they're larger though than what the customer needs at an instantaneous point, and they do send the power onto Holland's system. That even happens at a residential level. We have some solar arrays that are out there that are 5 times in the size of the array to what the average use is of the customer, because the sun isn't always shining, and because it's not always that intense, the amount of production on average meets the amount of use on average. But at any given time, the solar array might be producing more than what that home is needing, or there might be less than what that home is actually needing being produced. There's growing popularity on these. Environmental based is one reason, but technology costs are also coming down significantly, specifically for solar. And then, with some increasing energy costs. Now I'll say generally lately that's been a little bit more static, flat, or maybe even decreasing in terms of natural gas prices, but you're seeing, at least the first two being the primary drivers for that increase. Again, let's look at PURPA. Again, these bigger ones are not very often that we would see this, but if somebody would have something that would be larger than our distributed generation program, they still could build it and inject it into our system, and we would be obligated to take the power and to pay a certain amount of money for that. The amount that we have to pay is what's constituted as our avoided cost. So as a utility, we'd have to look at, what do we avoid in terms of any costs that resource is providing to us some energy. So we're going to avoid some costs. Generally, those typically are fuel. So we're not burning fuel at Holland Energy Park maybe, or at some other resource that we own. That tends to be an avoided cost. If we needed more power and the capacity to produce power, then we might actually also be obligated to pay something for the capacity that these resources provide. But that's only if we have a need for it that's out there. And that's what the law dictates. So we have that obligation if they can produce something that is a qualifying facility. So if it's renewable and they register it as a qualifying facility, then we would have obligations under PURPA. But the amount that we would have to pay as a utility would be limited to our avoided costs. And we're seeing some growth in this area, primarily in the investor-owned utilities, because number one, they have more needs for power, both capacity and energy going forward. So the amount that these resources could get in terms of their avoided cost is actually greater than it is in some other areas, including what it would be in Holland. So here you see kind of a breakdown in terms of the facilities in Michigan. There's been a lot of development in the past with landfill gas and hydro, and more recently with wind. But we're going to start seeing probably more growth in solar going forward. Along with the paying avoided costs, if somebody would build something that would have to be, they would want the assurances that if that generator wasn't operating, that the BPW was actually there to back them up, then we would be obligated to actually provide them other rates for that as well. So the BPW actually has to, for a PURPA qualifying unit, has to provide what are called backup or supplemental power rates if that entity would elect to buy that. And so that typically is going to come up in the cases of a combined heat and power unit where they might, have downtime that's unexpected due to maintenance or an interruption or breakdown. And there the utility would have the ability to create a rate structure to get compensated for that emergency supply of power when that generator needed it to back it up. Again, these don't happen very often in Holland, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but just to let you know that larger resources could interconnect to us underneath PURPA. So we did make some changes in our rate book, updating some of these standby rates, creating a dedicated chapter for the PURPA qualifying facilities, and that installations greater than 550 kilowatts no longer had to be customer owned. We previously had those having to be customer owned because the PURPA law doesn't require it. We made those adjustments to ours as well. But again, these are for larger generating assets, typically not what you're going to see in terms of a home or even a small business type of application. So the one I am going to focus on a little bit more is our net metering program, or what are called our net energy metering, I should call it. And that deals with smaller customer-owned generation. And again, with the passage of law here in Michigan back in 2008, investor-owned utilities had to create these programs. It was optional for municipalities. And under PURPA, we had to also consider it under PURPA to create these type of programs. And we did consider it and found that we were willing to do that here in Holland to create these programs where a customer, a small entity, like a resident or a small business wanted to create customer-owned generation, they could do that. And then we had certain rules that were related to how they interconnected to us to make sure that it was safe, didn't cause reliability issues on the grid, things like that. And then in addition to that, because there could be an exchange of power, how were those customers going to be compensated for that? And later in the state, the law changed and it shifted in the state for the investor-owned utilities from what we call true net metering to an inflow-outflow based for those regulated utilities. Again, still optional for municipalities. Spend a little bit more time talking about what true net metering is versus inflow-outflow in a few slides. But here you can see that there's been a fairly significant growth, and this is only through 2017 here, looking at the number of distributed generation installations here in Michigan. And again, solar has been the predominant amount. And I would say a lot of that has been residential level solar. So what does it look like for the BPW? This is current information here. We actually have 8 residential customers here in our Holland BPW service territory. All of them are solar. The average size is 4 kilowatts and the maximum is about 5.2. The average customer uses about 600 kilowatt hours in a month, which is just under 1 kilowatt an hour if you look at the amount of 720 hours in a month. So when you see a size here of 4 or 5, that makes you understand that there are times that the solar array actually generates more than what the house is using. But there are a lot of hours where the sun isn't shining or the solar intensity is not that great. So then the BPW is using some of that back. Net metering or net energy metering is really talking about how crediting and debiting of that account takes place. On the commercial and industrial level, there are also some installations. There are actually 11 of them in our service territory, and they range in size greatly. A lot of them are solar, but we also have one wind installation and we have a battery installation where battery charging and then discharging is going on. And again, part of that is not necessarily commensurate with the use of load at that site. So we are actually allowing some net energy metering at that location as well. There are also 3 utility. One of them is at our service center. We have a parapet mounted wind turbine. and also some solar on the backside. And then the Mill Street lift station has a wind turbine added as well. Mill Street, I think, is the one that's connected in using the SkyStream one at the Civic Center, if I'm not mistaken about that. And then there are also 3 pending applications that are under evaluation right now by our engineering staff. So let's talk about true net metering, just so you understand how that worked. True net metering is what we had before July 1 of 2019. And again, that's based upon the meter technology, and the monthly bill was based upon the net change in the meter position. That meter could spin backwards or forward. And so what happened was that meter would spin backwards and forward out throughout the month, and whatever the net result of it is, we applied the residential rate to that net amount. And all excess generation was credited at the full retail rate, essentially. So during the day, if 4 kilowatts was being produced, 1 kilowatt is being used, and 3 kilowatts were being credited back at the full retail rate during that time frame. Inflow outflow is the current methodology that we're using. And it was also the amount that was proposed, or the program that was proposed for the investor-owned utilities here in Michigan. And it uses smart meter technology to measure the actual inflow separate from the outflow from the home. And essentially allows for you to price those products differently to be able to get at better reflecting the cost of service for that usage versus what's flowing in. Just an example of that here under the prior program. Sun's not shining, the day is starting, and so this use is happening, the consumption's happening, and you see the electric meter starting to increase here slowly. The sun starts to come out and the consumption grows. Solar panel starts generating, the consumption is still growing, but it's slower than what it was earlier in the day, because some of the usage in the home is being made up by the solar panel. Later in the day, you see that flows back through the meter, and you see that start to decrease because the solar panel now is producing more than what the home is needing. And so as that backs through, now what you do is you take the current minus the previous, and you're left with 3 kilowatt hour usage. That would be applied to the retail rate for residential customers then. So that net amount is what's applied. Under our current program, what happens is, again, during the beginning of the day, no production from the solar panel, but there's consumption going on. So it's flowing through the meter. You see that increase. And then as the day goes on, you see that there's still some more consumption as the solar panel, because the solar panel hasn't overcome the amount that the home is using. But as soon as that happens, now you see the meter separately reading the amount of outflow going back into the BPW. So it leaves the inflow alone, and then it separately tracks the outflow. And then at the end of the day, you net the amount of inflow at 11 kilowatts, the outflow at 8. That still nets to 3, but now it allows you to compensate those things differently based upon cost of service. And that's really what the next chart is dealing with here, or the next approach. So the rate book was changed in July 1 to go from the true net metering to the inflow outflow. And the crediting was different. And so on all systems, the inflow is based upon the entire rate, which includes energy. It also includes the delivery charges, which pays for the infrastructure, the lines, the poles, all the things that need to be there to deliver the energy to the home. Now what we're doing is we're crediting on the outflow. If you are a smaller system, you get the energy rate back, but not the delivery. So the delivery is still based upon the on the total inflow, which can be offset somewhat by the solar, provided that the solar is not, spinning it back out, but all the way down to where the inflow meter stops, you're getting charged the energy plus the delivery. On what flows out, that separately tracked meter, you're getting the energy back. So at the end of the day, what you're really left with is a charge for the delivery if you've netted all of the energy. And the idea behind that is you still need that delivery system connected to you, so somebody has to pay for that delivery system infrastructure and the recovery of that. So that's how that's based. When you're a much larger system, what we're crediting back is the avoided cost. So even though our energy rate might be 5.2 cents per kilowatt hour, the fuel that we're using at Holland Energy Park or the energy that we might be buying wholesale from the market might be closer to 2 to 3 cents per kilowatt hour. So for these larger systems, you're really getting credited back based upon the avoided cost of what we're not incurring in terms of fuel expense or market purchases. With this change, though, we grandfathered all existing customers from 10 years to the time frame that they made their application for the installation and connection of these distributed generation resources. So they still are on the true rate or the true net metering of the full rate for 10 years. And again, looking at the categories here, this is just another way of looking at the rate book. So our net metering customers that are grandfathered, again, less than 550 kilowatts, they have to match the size of their generator to their average annual needs. So they can't make something that's much larger than what they need on an average annual basis. And you can see that they're charged energy and delivery and they get back energy and delivery. But for new customers that are coming in or those that are off the grandfathered situation, they are charged energy and delivery coming in. But if they are in the less than 30 kilowatt category or between 30 and 125, they're only getting back the energy portion or that 5.2 cents per kilowatt hour. And if they are larger than 125 up to the 550, they're getting the BPW's avoided costs, which are generally the fuel costs or the wholesale market costs. Another important thing that we did when we studied this, and it's in the rate in that full report, is we also looked at, because customers are incentivized to or are interested in having a greener portfolio for their usage, is to look at our voluntary green pricing program or our elective renewable energy rate. And what we discussed there is that we could, similar to what other utilities have done in Michigan here, look at lowering the cost of that program from 1.5 cents per kilowatt hour to 1 cent per kilowatt hour. So we did make that change July 1 too. So if you elect, just as the city has done for its buildings and the BPW has done for its operational areas of the service center and our other facilities other than the water reclamation facility, we've adopted the renewable energy rider for that at 1 cent per kilowatt hour. And that applies to any customer class, whether it's residential, commercial, or industrial. And it can be up to 100% of their needs from renewable energy. The additional recommendations in this area in total, when you look at the distributed generation program and this green pricing program, were to perform a value of solar study. So when we look at value solar, we know that it provides energy back to us. But as a utility, are there other benefits that the solar array on somebody's house provides? Does it help offset investment in distribution infrastructure long-term? Does it help with power quality issues? Are there other things that are inherent values? And if you recall, right now we compensate at 5.2 cents per kilowatt hour, which is still larger than what our avoided cost is. Is that enough of a compensation to account for these other value of solar that maybe comes into the picture? So the suggestion was that we want to do a little bit more in-depth study of that to see if two things should happen. One, if the rates should be adjusted. And two, right now there's a cap on the program of 1% of our system demand qualifying for our distributed generation program. Well, right now, if you go back to the slide, if we go back to the slide that showed what is in the BPW's program, you can see that we've got in total about 780 kilowatts. 1% of our peak would be about 2,200 kilowatts. So we are only about 1/3 subscribed right now. So there's room in our program. But before we run out of that space, as there's more interest, we might want to look at lifting the cap somewhat if our system can handle additional distributed generation on it and it wouldn't cause instability issues in parts of our area. So those were recommendations. Additional recommendations included to, again, evaluate the distribution system for locations where we might want to incentivize distributed generation because it could help offset the investment for new building of distribution or potentially even the power quality on that distribution area. So really kind of targeting and incentivizing locations. And then the third was to be more, do a better job marketing and promoting the elective renewable energy program, which we right now have a fairly small number of participants in. And obviously one way we can do that is by leading by example with the BPW and city doing what we've done. But another is actually making a more concerted effort on the marketing of that. And we are planning on doing some more work here, even beginning in this January, in this calendar year, being more aggressive on the marketing of that. So that is the background on how it works if you are a customer and want to put in your own distributed generation at your location. And so I'll answer any questions that anybody has first on that.
Dave, is there a significant difference in installations that are land constrained and need to go rooftop, like downtown?
Differences in cost?
Yeah, complexity, cost, types of panels used because of weight constraints on the roofs, maintenance because of snow and things like that.
Yeah, and I don't know if I'd certainly entertain if Jeff, I know Jeff's done some work in distributed solar as well, if he wants to jump in on this. I will tell you, we have installations that are both categories. We have rooftop, most of ours are rooftop, but not all of them. Agritech is our largest installation, and that's about 500 kilowatts, and that's a freestanding situation there. And there are others that are more freestanding, but most of the residential is rooftop, and even in some of our commercial applications, like the GDK block has some solar installation on it off from 8th Street as well.
Okay.
And so we have that. I don't know if the complexity is that much different, especially if you can plan it in up front. But the cost, one of the things that's interesting about how the tax credits work, I didn't really spend a lot of time on tax credits. The tax credits were just extended. That doesn't help a BPW, because we're not taxed, but the tax credit used to be 30%. It was dropped down to 26%, and next year it was supposed to drop down to 22%. They extended out the 26% tax credit. In some cases, if your roof upgrade needs to happen to support the solar, you can actually get the roof cost as part of the cost of the project.
Oh.
So it qualifies as part of the investment tax credit that's eligible. So that there are some things that are, based upon freestanding versus roof that enter into it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that last piece on the roof maintenance or the roof structure being applicable to the tax credit is very much dependent on the purview of your accountant and what they're comfortable with.
Yeah, I'll make all my necessary disclaimers in terms of that. Thank you, Brian.
Well,
But
no,
I just
not intended to be financial advice by Dave.
right, exactly.
I can tell you because I know there are people that go around and talk about how you can include all of the roof maintenance as a part of the tax deduction, and they put it in proposals tied to ROI, and that you don't, I mean, you couldn't put that in front of 10 CPAs and have, you know, 2 of them totally agree with that. Most of them would be like, so that aside, so that's definitely a thing. The other thing as it relates to on-site that's worthy of note is the best time to do it is when you are actually doing roof maintenance or replacing your roof, because roofs tend to have 25-year life cycles and solar panels similarly. And so if you put a brand new roof on, you know, 20 years ago and you need to replace it in 5 years, putting brand new solar panels on a roof you're going to need to replace in 5 years doesn't make a ton of sense. So these are not like, you know, special to solar array sort of things. It's more just like, you know, more holistic thinking about this stuff. But that's when you can, you know, get some economies of scale. You know, we've done this with my company for like S2 Yachts. We help them do their on-site solar, and they were looking at a roof bill and a maintenance that is like, you know, infinity ROI. And they were like, oh, what if we put solar on this at the same time, fix the roof and put solar on it? And now they're just looking at the project totally differently, because it's not just pure maintenance. They're like getting some sort of value back. Even if they're paying more, there's something coming back. So that's a sweet spot of timing in terms of talking to businesses. And there's usually a very large disconnect between, you know, facilities and maintenance budgets and how a solar project would enter into an organization and how that would be discerned and discussed. And so that's, but in terms of, putting it on the ground or putting it in the roof, there's not a huge, to my knowledge, there's not a, you know, if there's a swing, it's not more than 5 or 10% one way or the other, depending on the situation. Jeff, maybe
Jeff, you got any additional comments?
I guess the comment, I think that's, from my understanding of it, I think what both of you said is all right. I mean, where you really see the swings is when you go from something like, you know, 3, 4, 500 kilowatts to something that's like 50 megawatts. That's
right.
Really where you start to see the prices change. And those larger systems are, because of the size of them, those are all going to be
utility scale.
You know, they're going to be utility. They're going to be putting solar.
The reason I asked it is just thinking about downtown as more of a, is there an opportunity, you know, for a strategy that captures smart zone money, possibly pulling together more of a consortium buy for a whole bunch of landlords collectively with support maybe from BPW and Holland Energy Fund?
I guess just a comment on that idea specifically. There are community solar projects. There's one like Consumers has some like that I know of, where, you know, they put a larger installation and then you can buy into different pieces of that larger installation. I know there are also kind of community solar rooftop projects that different areas of the country. I don't know off the top of my head, but Dave might, where they've done similar types of things for, you know, like apartment development or condo development, you know, things like that, where it's, you know, people don't have their individual rooftop space, but they can kind of buy into a community project as part of
you know, space. That's a great point. I think, you know, when you start looking at those type of programs, you know, like a community solar project, there's been a few of those, for example, around different municipalities, different areas. Consumers has one by Grand Valley. You know, I think those are the thing you get into there is the scale difference. So where net metering projects or distributed generation projects help you is at the home level. If you can like spin your meter backwards, or you can put less demand on the grid, you know, generally, then you can find that you can not only save on the energy, but on the distribution costs when you are actually offsetting your house use. When you have a community solar project, you're really just still taking another resource somewhere that's differently located and having to distribute it across the utility to the end use. So at that point, my question is, why not invest in, as a utility, then the largest you can to get the economy of scale? Because while community solar might feel good, the economics of it really just are not on par with the investment at a larger scale. So where the distributed works is where it benefits. It can benefit the utility system and also benefit the usage at that location. That's where you can start to create some mutual benefits, and that's what we think the pricing of the distributed generation program represents right now. But that kind of thing is usually more of value. And I think when you start looking at like the downtown, Boyd, I'm not saying that wouldn't work. That could work. But again, scale matters. And I think when you take a look at the program and what you would get back in terms of the energy value, I know it's challenging right now with the cost of electricity. It's challenging to see the economics of it, but not to say that couldn't happen. I just, as the person looking at, we're going to achieve a certain amount of solar installation, and that's the target. Well, now I want to do that as cost effectively as possible. So I always kind of gravitate back towards the scale and investment that we're making, for example, in both a 50 megawatt and a 60 megawatt array right now that are coming online this year. The economics on those is so much better than what it is on residential level.
Yeah.
But
Just to kind of piggyback off exactly what Dave's saying, just like a ballpark number, you're talking probably 2 to 3 times as much in terms of cost for any sort of distributed generation versus, we buy a field and we put solar panels in it.
Oh, wow.
So you're talking it's a significant premium that you're paying to be able to do anything like that.
Interesting.
The only thing I'd like to add that is still way overwhelmed by what Dave just said, and in particular the number that Jeff gave, is that there are some communities that I don't think they've put their own resources into it, but there are some communities that have kind of done what I'll call like, hey, if a neighborhood wants to get together, and if instead of a neighbor just by themselves wants to contract with a solar company to put an array on their roof, that maybe there's some way to kind of facilitate that a company comes in and does 5 or 6 programs all at the same time.
That's what I was,
And then by doing that, maybe they get like a 5% discount across the top or something because the company. But again, as Dave and Jeff, kind of talk about those numbers, and you kind of say, okay, like how much are we chasing after by trying to put a program like that together, and then what's the comparable ROI? That's where some of that gets a little bit interesting about how that works.
This is the distinguishment between what you guys control at the BPW versus programs and influencing the greater community, right? Like Dave is thinking exactly how he should be, I think, but then is there an educational, way to just promote, doing on-site solar and helping people understand a good way of going about buying it, or doing cooperative buying programs and facilitating those things? Those don't have to be opposing things. It can be both and, because there is, because it makes sense for businesses to put solar panels. I mean, on new construction, if you're planning on owning the building, there's very little reason from a financial perspective to not put solar on new construction if you plan on owning the building, like for longer than 10 or 15 years. Like it does, like the math on from a financial perspective totally supports it. And do people know that really well? Probably not. And can we lift that up somehow, some way? I think those are sort of like buckets alongside the big, utility scale.
Right.
So-
And I think the partnership aspect there, is that, so entities that come in and make this investment or help homeowners or businesses make this investment, what they tend to do is they tend to, try to figure out a rental program where they can monetize the tax credits from the building owner.
Yep.
And what they do is they give those tax credits to people who invest in their company that have the highest tax brackets out there. So they're maximizing, the value of that tax credit.
Yep.
Whereas a homeowner, you might have a 15% federal tax bracket or a 22% federal tax bracket. Believe me, there's a lot of investors out there with a much higher tax bracket. And so these entities figure out a way of maximizing that by essentially lowering the tax burden from people who are investors that have much higher tax brackets.
Oh.
So, these are parts of those programs, but it's not something the BPW can enjoy because we're not, taxed. Obviously, we don't have to pay that in the first place. But, that's one of these things where our program, enables, but private sector is one that does more of the promotional aspect associated with that. And that's because they know the details of what they can offer for monetizing, those things.
And to your point, Dave, and I think this is easily skipped over, so I'll reiterate it. In terms of residential, especially, residential solar is not super compelling in Holland BPW, mostly because Holland BPW has great residential rates compared to consumers. I mean, because you guys deliver affordable electricity, it hurts the financial case for putting solar on your roof compared to consumers or DTE or a lot of neighboring places. And that's, I had solar quoted for my house, and these places that'll do it, they're slick. They just need your address. They do a Google map. They can quote it in a day. They never have to come out. They give you all the information. It's really pretty harmless and brainless to get it quoted. And they want to see a copy of your utility bill to see how much you're paying. And the guy that I talked to was like, I've never seen an ROI this bad in Michigan. And he's like, it's because you're paying so little for electricity. He had never quoted anything in the Holland BPW territory. So so this is part of like the overall rate structure conversation is, are we de-incentivizing, is affordability hurting some of these other business cases?
Right.
Interesting.
But if we offer other solutions to get to renewable energy, either through the utility itself investing in solar at a bigger scale,
Yep.
or offering a voluntary green energy rate where you could subscribe at 1 penny, which is going to be much better than the the amount that you might pay by putting on your own solar, is that still the collective best situation, from a policy perspective, because everybody has options,
Right.
and we can do it at scale, as opposed to doing it at an individual level. And then you still have choices, Brian, in that particular case, that if for some reason our rates go up significantly in 10 years, by the voluntary green energy rate, you can pay for that for 10 years and then be in a much better ROI, after that time frame.
Yeah.
So you get to sort of capture the market continuing to go down and watch the energy rates by essentially running your credits, over a period of time.
Yeah.
So,
Dave, this is something, maybe this can be homework for you or someone on your team. Could you distribute, I don't know if you've done this or if it's in the resource document, can we see like a little table of the rates, residential, commercial, industrial, something super simplified. I know that it can be complex, but it was interesting to hear you say, I didn't realize this, that you charge a penny regardless of the rate, regardless of whether it's an industrial or a residential, it's still a penny.
correct.
Like that could have some fine tuning opportunities.
Well, I mean, it's really part of the energy. And it's really taking a little bit higher cost energy resource. And so because it's part of the energy, it's sort of independent of whether it's a residential, commercial, or industrial customer. It's all volumetric based upon how much they use. So it's going to be proportional to their use. But
well, right. But if I'm paying 10 cents as a residential and a business is paying 6 cents, then that 1 penny adder percentage wise is proportionally a difference. And that's, I guess, anyways, if you could put that in a resource.
Yeah, we can share that for sure. One other thing I wanted to share before everybody left real quick here, just to kind of go back to our, let me see here. I've got to get it up in front of me. Bear with me 1 second. Okay. So back to the opportunity matrix now. And again, any other questions anybody has is fine. We can, delve into it. But again, just a reminder, they're in electric portfolio, which now we spent the IRP and distributed generation discussion and starting to zero in on strategies. We've got things that are currently happening. We've got 13 megawatts of solar coming online from these bigger arrays here in Michigan in 2021. The BPW and city have elected 100% renewable for their offices. And we have the electric renewable energy rate available to customers. Now that's current things happening. We obviously have a lot more that's happened in the past, that have been things that have improved our portfolio. But we've got a contract for utility scale wind that's coming up in 2022. It's expiring. So we have an opportunity to look at that contract, either renew more wind or potentially add solar as an alternative to that, to essentially replace that in kind with solar. Another strategy could be looking at a local level, but reminder that it's 7 acres per megawatt that you have to look at. So if we're going to be building something of scale, there's a significant amount of land use that's needed, but looking at viability of local solar. In the next 3 to 5 years, we're completing the combined heat and power unit that goes along with the biodigester, the anaerobic digester at the water reclamation facility. And then we would be supplementing whatever the needs are at that location through the electric renewable energy rate for that site too at that time. And then, as it was discussed earlier, there's an opportunity to increase promotion of the green energy rate. And there's also the opportunity to perform this value of solar study to inform, rate policy. Brian, to your point, does that need to be looked at in terms of, again, the green energy rate by class? Is our distributed generation program crediting appropriately based upon the value it's providing? That's a little bit more comprehensive look at that and recommendation that could happen in the short term. You start moving out a little bit in the horizon. We have some landfill gas that's under contract that is coming off. We also have potential for looking at combined heat and power at some industrial sites that have a higher thermal load, where maybe the utility would own the combined heat and power unit potentially. Or look at different ownership structures there. And then, of course, we know further in the time horizon in 2030, it's actually closer in the 10-year now because it's 2029, but we have Bell River retiring, Campbell retiring in 2040, and then looking at how we could not lose our investments in baseload generation that we have in Holland Energy Park long-term, but looking at are there low carbon options for fuel there long-term, like hydrogen, or even looking at reactor technology sometime longer in the future. These are the strategies that have been identified to date. Again, there may be other things that you want to push and pull on here. There may be things that come from other communities. But I wanted to, now that we've had the education, the idea is to kind of come back to this lever now and say, is there anything within this 3 to 5 year that you are starting to shake your head, or not, I should say, maybe towards, those are good strategies to maybe have on a list for final consideration. Or are there additional information that you need to help inform the list of potential strategies to pursue in the next 3 to 5 years underneath this lever of electric portfolio?
So we'll discuss this in the future or now?
Yeah, I mean, if you have something right now, I want to respect your time. It's a little after 5. But if you have any initial reactions, that's great. We certainly can come back to this on the 18th too. The idea is, I think for Keith and I, what we would like to do is start to build a list of those potential 3 to 5 year strategies.
Mhm.
And so, obviously it won't be finalized until the report goes in, but just to kind of continue to work in that direction.
And sometimes it's helpful for different people to say the same thing. So basically what we're looking for here is, okay, we've downloaded the lever called the energy portfolio.
Got it.
And while you're not committing to kind of the different things that we've talked about here,
Okay.
we don't think it's a good plan to not take a moment here and instead just download all of this information, and then who knows, 2 months from now having to go back and say, hey, do you remember all those things we talked about the energy portfolio?
Mm-hmm.
Like, did you think we missed something? Did you want to strike something? Did you want to move something from one column to the other? We think it's really good process at this point to say, hey, does this look good? Or like set us on a direction to do something different. Because otherwise, when we get to the end of all of this, it's going to almost feel like you have to start from scratch again to some extent.
All right. So I would be happy to start. And
Yeah.
in the current one, I would say, yes, the elective renewable energy, that needs to be marketed a little bit. Because I just found out myself earlier. In the 3 to 5 year goals, yes, increased promotion. Okay. Do we move on, or can we just
Go ahead.
3 to 5?
Well, so the idea here is that when we're setting this, not to say that we're going to wait 3 to 5 years for this, Nikki, the idea is that this group here would help set a target to say, we want to have promotion of that, and we'd like to see some interim result from that in 3 to 5 years. So we're it's kind of like starting now. We want you to work on promoting it, and we hope to see some sort of result as it relates to that. So I don't want you to get the impression that we're going to wait 5 years on a promotion.
Okay. And I like local solar resource. While the wind contract, I guess I don't know about. I like the idea of wind, but they're building giant wind machines. Like there's one placed in the Rotterdam, Netherlands harbor just now that's huge. And so this is, they're learning more and more, and the price is coming down. And so I don't know, for us, the viability of wind versus solar. Solar is obviously workable here, and you can sell credits and all that kind of stuff. With wind, replacing the contract, I can't judge.
Yeah, no, and I wouldn't ask you to judge it. I think the idea here is that as a strategy, you would recommend that there'd be a detailed exploration of how we're going to replace the expiring contract with additional renewable, and that the group would achieve some sort of replacement of that in the 3 to 5 year time horizon.
Mm-hmm. So said again, what would happen if it's helpful, right, is the 3 to 5 year goal column that Dave has highlighted there basically is, if at the end of this, the SPT says, hey, these are the things that we think are strategies that we're going to recommend to council to pursue. It's not that, okay, they'd be done at that point, but then that's where the steering committee, the staff level group of Dave and I and the staff, then would work on the next 3 to 5 years to implement the things that you've recommended to council that we should pursue, which we've already done twice, right? So this would be the third iteration of that structure, that process of how to move from plan strategy, you know, to implementation.
One that pokes me in the eye a bit is the Campbell plant, you know, looking at a faster retirement and what the implications are, you know, moving that up. What a good story, track record if, you know, we're out of coal by 2030. And it just seems like there's an adequate amount of time to figure that one out of what it means to pull it in and cost implications and seeing that sit out that far.
We're smiling about that, Boyd, because we anticipated that question. So you gave the softball for Dave to answer, and I didn't have to.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. You know, here's how that relationship works. Detroit Edison for Bell River and then Consumers Energy are the majority, for Campbell, are the majority owners of those facilities. MPPA, Michigan Public Power Agency, of which Holland is a member, is the minority owner of those facilities. They have a small slice. Matter of fact, for Campbell, for example, that's an 800 plus megawatt facility, of which MPPA owns about 42 megawatts, so a very small amount. And then MPPA, being that minority owner, has certain rights, but those rights are not as it relates to determining the retirement date or the decommissioning date or things like that. The only thing that MPPA has available to it would be to try to sell its portion of a plant to somebody else. And, you know, the problem with that obviously is that not a lot of people are buying coal right now from a new coal plant or new plant, or including in their portfolio. So that'd be a tough sell to begin with, along with the fact that that plant would have certain retirement obligations, legacy costs. So MPPA, unless it would sell it, and I think that's practically impossible, would be obligated to it. Now, Holland is a member of that. It signed agreements to participate and support paying for its proportional share of MPPA's minority position in those plants. And so as MPPA is obligated, Holland is obligated to that. I'm not saying that in the next 10 years, there won't be changes in that timeline. If the different owners of those plants think about things differently than what they do today. I know that both of them themselves have stated goals in terms of their portfolio performance. But I will tell you that, you know, our ability as Holland to effectuate some change there, the most we probably could do, Boyd, is that we would sell the energy into the wholesale market from these plants, and we would buy other energy in place of it.
Okay.
So the reality is that as long as those plants dispatch and are owned, they're going to burn coal, carbon dioxide is going to be emitted, and it's going to be power that goes into the marketplace. So if global warming is a global issue, Holland deciding to either take it into our portfolio or not is really purely an economic situation at that point, because you're going to still be obligated to the fixed cost of the plant, and you're going to try to sell off the energy to somebody else, and then you're going to buy something new that's probably going to have a higher cost than just the energy would have been on that plant. So you'll pay a premium for it, and the amount of carbon emitted probably won't change. Mm-hmm. So I just, you know, laying everything out on that, just so you understand how that works. I'm not saying that additional work couldn't be pursued to try to understand more fully what the cost impacts of those things would be. But, you know, if you're looking at reducing carbon to the world, I don't know that anything that we do is going to change that.
You know, are there exit clauses whatsoever, Dave? Because one thing that does cause faster retirement of things is low demand.
Yeah, no, I mean, what dictates demand
But
more
I'm
than
saying
anything
because of
is
exit
really,
clause. I mean, if
yeah.
all of a sudden there is an exit clause that can be put into effect, then that's lower demand.
So right now, the units, all of them, produce energy into this marketplace that we're in, based upon how their price for energy stacks up with the price in the wholesale market. So Holland exiting or deciding to do something different isn't going to change the supply demand relationship on that level. That's going to suddenly have that plant not economical to dispatch into the market. It either is economical today or it's not. And primarily it is. When you look at the energy value, it's still economical to dispatch into the market. So, like I said, it's really not a matter of whether Holland decides to sell it all or whether it could somehow exit the contract anyway. As long as the market has a value for it, that plant is going to produce the energy it's going to emit.
Okay.
The only thing that's going to change that, I would say, is so now we start talking about policy. And at a federal level, one of the things that's being kicked around is a carbon tax, right? And if a carbon tax would be implemented on a federal level, it's going to then put an extra cost on that plant, which now might change the economics of that plant in relationship to the demand for the electricity. But that's not something Holland is going to dictate.
Right.
So that I just want everybody to understand, what control we have, what control we don't have as it relates to that. What strategies we might have in terms of if we wanted to reject it all to the marketplace and just sell it and get the value of that energy and buy something as a replacement, you could do that. We're still going to be obligated to the fixed cost of the plant because you can't escape that unless somehow we could sell it to others, and nobody's going to buy a coal plant with just a certain amount of life left on it that's going to have retirement costs and obligations. And so it's going to be more related to, do you want to pay a premium to essentially just sell all the power into that wholesale market, continue to pay the fixed cost of the plant, and then buy something that's greener for our own portfolio, even though that carbon is still going to be emitted because that plant's still going to run because it's still viable in the marketplace.
Becomes window dressing then, and missing the bigger spirit of what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Thanks. That was excellent. Thank you so much.
It's complicated, I know, and it's just so everybody understands the how that all works.
Hey, Dave, could you repeat real quick? It's 800. The MPPA is on the hook for 42, so 5%.
Yeah.
And what is Holland's take of the MPPA? We're a pretty big player in the MPPA, aren't we?
Well, of that particular project, we do things on a project by project basis.
Okay.
We're about 25% of that 40, so we're just under 11 megawatts.
So we're like 1% of that entire place.
Yeah.
So that doesn't strike me like, even if we were running around threatening to leave or there, it's not.
And to put it in perspective for Bell River, that's 2 units that are both about 650 megawatts apiece. So it's about 1,300 megawatts. And Holland's portion is about 37 of that.
Right. So we don't matter relative to these places.
We're small.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's good. And I think it's really good information to understand that whether we pulled out and paid it and all of this or not, it doesn't actually, like, the goal around carbon is not actually being impacted either way. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what we do.
Right.
Sure.
So, but the other piece of it is individuals within our system that don't like that have an elective renewable energy option available to them.
Sure.
You immediately go up to 100%. So again, there still is choice on that.
Yep.
And I think our window dressing would essentially be kind of doing what anybody that's doing on an individual basis electing. And I'm not trying to call that window dressing, but essentially what they're doing is they're rejecting the carbon elements of our portfolio, and they're taking in credits from resources in Michigan that have been qualified as renewable and saying, I want that part of my portfolio.
Mhm.
And so on an individual basis, whether it's residential, commercial, or industrial, all of our customers have that option available to them.
Yeah.
And if we think that's desirable, then indeed we would increase promotion of that.
Yeah, of them doing that for sure. I mean, we want them to be aware that that option is available to them. So we do believe that, we can and we should increase the promotion of the elective renewable rate.
And I have a question about the Bell River plant.
Yeah.
So it's in our portfolio. We actually, our energy use is from the natural gas, the energy park mostly. Is that ever used, or is that just in case? I mean, was that why it was initially?
It runs pretty often, Nikki. And so our intensity of our electric portfolio, that 1,150 or so pounds per megawatt hour of carbon dioxide that we emit, is an average of the rates of all of our different resources and how much they produce in a year. So Holland Energy Park itself only has a rate of about 800 pounds per megawatt hour. Bell River has a rate of about 21, probably 2,200 pounds per megawatt hour.
Mhm.
So the Bell River counts towards our average. It's what brings our average from 800 up to the 1,100. We're counting that in our carbon intensity of our portfolio, and it counts in terms of the amount then that we apply to the community's greenhouse gas per capita metric. So if we were to sell it all, this would be, I guess, a good question for this group, and probably one that we need to answer going forward in terms of how we measure. Because if we sell it all, we still are obligated to the plant. We still own it technically through MPPA. But would we count it? I mean, would we even count it in our metric at that point? Because it's still producing carbon. There would be those that would say, hey, you created this strategy out there to just sell that off and buy renewable in, but it's still producing carbon. You got to count it, as your community's greenhouse gas metric. That might not even be something palatable for certain people in the community to say that we're not going to count it, if we were to just sell it all to the grid and then buy a renewable resource as opposed to that. So it just depends on that reaction too. But just to let you know that it's being used, it's being counted, and it does go to create that 1,150 pounds per megawatt hour that our intensity is.
And if you really want to get caught in your head for a while, or maybe this is just a commentary on me, if you try to figure out the electron that you use for your light or your computer or your whatever sometime, and you try to say, well, where did that electron come from? The grid just doesn't work like that, right? So all of this is really complex, right? So there's not an easy talking point that kind of answers that Bell River Campbell question.
Yeah.
But yet the reality is, we don't have a direct contract with Campbell or Bell River that has an exit clause in it.
Yeah. If I like to think about it like, if the grid is a lake and all the coal energy is brown water, and solar, like you put a wind farm or solar, that's pouring green water into the lake. It doesn't you don't actually get pure green energy unless you literally have a solar panel on your roof. It's still, the grid is still a mixture of all this stuff. And in these instances, you wouldn't even be turning off the brown water. It would still be going in. So anyways, it's 5:25. So I personally am running out of time. I don't want to cut the broader conversation short, but I think that it's a little bit of homework for everybody to focus on this portfolio. And the electric portfolio and be thinking critically around, you know, is this what we like? Do we want to add something, move something? And like Dave and Keith said, you know, this isn't the only time we can talk about it. We can circle back, but we did want to take time to actually look at sections and say, do we like this or not? So yeah, do people want to jump into something else here, or does everyone else also have to go?
Well, if you have to go, you're our chair and you should
Yeah.
part of this conversation.
Travis can take over. He looks comfortable.
Travis is chilling. Ryan, I only had one thing to throw at the chairman for the future agenda, next one or next two. I'm a big believer in understanding the measurement. And so we know what we're measuring. I see in the CEP, you know, on page 26-ish, it gets into the how we're measuring carbon dioxide in our community, you know, how we get into the headline number and dividing it by our population. Can we take some agenda time as a group to get sort of educated on how that calculation is done?
Yeah.
What assumptions are in there and what direction those assumptions are heading even, you know, in the real world?
Yeah, I think that would be great. I don't feel equipped to do anything but say, I think that would be great. I mean, I think that what you're getting at, Boyd, is the root of where I've been a broken record around, like, what was the industrial like output 10 years ago, you know, and what was, I don't even know how many people, what was per capita, like how many people were there then and are there now? And like, yeah, how we define the number, I think is a really...
We can do that. Just give you some real basic. I told you what the intensity of the portfolio is.
Mm-hmm.
There's a certain amount of pounds per megawatt hour that are produced for our customers' needs. So we'll take that and multiply it by the usage that our customers have to figure out how many pounds they're responsible for.
Yeah.
Natural gas, we're getting data from SEMCO.
Okay.
And natural gas has a certain amount of carbon per unit of measure, whether it's a BTU or 1,000 cubic feet, that you can calculate. And then transportation, there are some assumptions, I would say, built into the transportation piece of it, maybe a little bit bigger assumptions in that area. But Andrew Reynolds gave a presentation on that, I know, recently to the what is it, the Living Sustainably Along the Lakeshore group at the library. And it wasn't a real long one. It was actually part of a presentation that they had on a number of different topics that night. And I think Travis was actually there for that one as well. So that's one that if you want Andrew to spend a little bit of time on, whether it's on the 18th or on one of the next meetings, we could do that.
We'll have to push it. Between Joe and we're going to have Ben Massey from Blue Source and Mike Troupis from Foresight do a combo on RECs and carbon offsets 101. So we're going to learn about what people talk about when they talk about RECs and carbon offsets, and get at least a 101 so we can all like learn the kindergarten version and then grow and get smarter from there. But because that's a whole, again, we keep circling back on the headline goal. You know, and a lot of the online, you know, comments are about, you know, become net zero and have a goal of zero. And you know, you don't get to zero without RECs and offsets. You know, you don't get there. So we wanted to get that going, and that'll be between that and Joe's, you know, early report. I think we'll have plenty to go through next time. So we'll try and buzz through the first parts of the agenda next time so we can have plenty of time for those two things.
Yeah.
There won't be a lot of report additions. I think if we can just maybe, Brian, have a real short amount of time for Joe to talk about where he's heading on his research.
Yeah.
And instead of like kind of looking at the report a little bit more, I mean, obviously we can, whatever the group wants to do, but I think then we can move right into that education piece on the offsets.
Yeah.
Becky, if you can share the agenda real quick here before Brian adjourns, I just want to point out one other thing. We've got meeting dates in the future. We started looking at that because right now we only had, I think, 2 more dates committed, which were identified here, January 18 and then February 1. I can tell you if we continue after February 1 at a 2-week interval, we're fine for not having any interference with BPW board meetings until we get into April. So we could have February 15, March 1, March 15, and March 29 work. So if that's working for everybody, we can, for the next go around, try to get you something that has more of those future dates in it based upon that 2-week interval.
Good.
Yep. Works.
And we technically, the 18th, would we hypothetically be in person? Are we past the order?
That'd be great.
Hypothetically, right now, the order, I think it expires the 14th or the 15th or whatever. So we'll wait and see. Although I'm just going to let you know, I'm not real hopeful that order is going to expire at that point in time from what I hear.
Okay.
So I think you should plan on Zoom.
Right.
And we will have communications with you all if we hear otherwise and can move back to what I think is a safe setting in our council. But right now, I don't think that's going to probably be possible.
Okay.
Right.
Good.
Someday.
It's coming. It's on the horizon.
It's coming.
At least we don't have to talk through masks, though. It's
We'll
not,
probably be doing this for long enough that we'll get back to normal, right?
Yeah.
Right.
However you define normal.
We'll be able to have an in-party celebration actually at the end of this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Unless I do really have to bounce. So if Travis, you want to go through adjournment and you guys can finish up anything here, but I really do have to bounce, you guys.
Right.
Okay.
Adios.
See you, Brian.
Thanks.
We're going to adjourn.
I second.
Yep.
All in favor of adjourning?
All right. Okay. Hey,
right.
nice move, Travis.
See you in 2 weeks.
All right.
Bye-bye.
There you go.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.